Okay. Well, Rabbi Walter, it's back by popular demand. I am super excited about this interview to kick the L season off. What better way than to invite back someone who the crowds were cheering for, bring Rabbi Walter back, because we only got to hear once from you, but you are a superstar author with multiple books. And this is a topic that I'm excited about today. Something that a lot of people don't know, but is truly, I'm sure, like you're going to talk about, Rabbi Walter, required knowledge for somebody that wants to be a law-abiding, God-fearing Jew. And that is the laws and the parameters of what in the world halacha is and psak halacha. So welcome to the show, Rabbi Walter, and it's good to have you back.
Thank you so much. Great to be back. Thank you for the invitation.
First of all, I'd like to ask, are you still in the same, you're the rabbi of the Woodside Synagogue of Ahavas Torah still, as of last time we checked?
I didn't get any pink slip, so yeah, in the meantime, I'm still the Rav here in Silver Spring, and I'm running the Gedolei Rabbanim here in Washington. I actually just came back from the summer. I spent where I spent the last 6 summers is the Mardasser in Camp Zone, Ura's Camp, which is a Kiruv camp, which is inspiring as ever. Every summer is really terrific to be around people who don't have the opportunity to be in Jewish schools throughout the year. So it's wonderful. It's close for me and my family to be there.
Oh, wow. That sounds exciting. Rabbi Walter, I want to jump right in. What in the world, let's kick it off. Let's try to go about this interview for somebody that's knows almost nothing, build up, and then get deeper and deeper. But how do you even define the word halacha, and why should I care about it, Rabbi Walter?
Okay, great question. Maybe I'll start with a story or two, if that's okay.
Let's do it that. Stories are better. Let's do that.
I think we'll sort of set the stage for your listeners and give some parameters in terms of setting the stage for our discussion. One of the great Rabbanim of the last centuries, Rabbi Pesach Frank. Rabbi Pesach Frank was the Rav of Yerushalayim, the chief rabbi. He lived in Geula, the famous Har Tzvi Shul in the middle of Geula. And a young girl came to him, knocked on his door, and showed him what seemed to have been a relatively simple shayla, showed him an egg. And an egg with a blood spot, and seemingly it would be an open and shut case, and it should be problematic, and she shouldn't be able to use it, to eat it, etc., etc. Tzvi Pesach Frank invited her in, this young girl, and asked her where she lives. And she said that she lives in Shari Chesed. So anybody knows the landscape a bit of Yerushalayim knows that to walk from Shari Chesed to Gula or vice versa takes you roughly 20, 25 minutes or so. But during the British Mandate, it was a little bit more complicated, a little bit more dangerous. And Tzvi Pesach Frank noted that, and he said to her, mutter. And she could use the egg, and she should go home and say hi to her parents. To the astonishment of the Talmidim who were there, who were apprenticing him, doing Shimush by Tzvi Pesach, who would have people coming to ask him shilas. So he noted their shock and their astonishment, and he said, you might be wondering why I paskin l'kula, why I was lenient on a shayla that would seem to be open and shut, black and white, that the egg should be usher and she shouldn't be able to eat it. So he said, let me explain to you. This girl lives in Shari Chesed. It's not a close walk, it's not an easy walk, and it could even be a dangerous walk. There are many Rabbanim, Poskim, Moira on Shari Chesed. The fact that her family sent her to ask me this question means that they were looking for a psak l'kula. Clearly, there were some financial considerations there, and the fact that she was taking that walk and going out of her way to come to me means that there was something implicit in the reason that they were sending her my way, and therefore, based upon a number of halachic factors, I leaned l'kula on the shayla. That's one story that sort of gives you insight in what it means to paskin a shayla. Paskin a shayla doesn't just mean yes or no, mutter asar, permitted, prohibited, tahar tameh, pure and impure. Answering a shayla requires the sixth sense, what sometimes we refer to as the fifth chelik of Shulchan Aruch, and therefore financial consideration is one of multiple factors probably that we'll talk about today in terms of what poskim take into account when they answer a shayla. Let me share with you one other story, which very much I think speaks to this point as well. One of the great poskim Gedolim Lamdanim of pre-war Europe, of course, was the Beis Halevi, Yosef Dov Levi Soloveitchik. The author of the Beis Halevi was the Rav of the city of Slutsk. Several days prior to Pesach, a blacksmith knocked on the door and came to ask the Beis Halevi the following shayla. Some might laugh at the shayla, but asked the Beis Halevi, is it permitted to use milk for the dalet kosos? So the Beis Levi responded and asked the fellow, did your doctor instruct you not to drink wine? Do you have some medical condition? I said, no, it's not a problem. So the Beis Levi said then, well, why would you want to use milk for your dalakosos, for the 4 cups of wine for the Seder? So the fellow answered, because I'm in financial hardship now, there's certain constraints I have financially, and it's cheaper for me to use milk than it is to use wine. So the Beis Levi left the room, and he returned with 25 rubles. And he turned to the fellow, to this blacksmith, said, here are 25 rubles. The blacksmith said, I didn't come for a handout, I came to ask a shayla. So the Beis Levi said, I understand, it's not a handout, I'm not giving you tzedakah, it's a loan. Consider it to be a halva, and when you have the money, you'll pay me back. Blacksmith took the money, walked away, closed the door, and on his way he went. Listening and overhearing the conversation was Rebbetzin Salvechik, the Beis Levi's wife. She said, what's going on? I heard the whole conversation. He asked if he could use milk instead of wine. If he needed wine, you could have given 2-3 rubles. Why did you give him 25 rubles? So Beis Levi says, you didn't hear what he asked me. If he was asking me for if milk could be used for the dalakosos, that means that he clearly doesn't have meat for the Seder, because you can't have milk and meat. Basar b'chalav at the same Suda. So that means he doesn't have meat, he doesn't have wine, he doesn't have any of his needs, and the family's needs for the Sidarim and for the entire Yantif of Pesach. I gave him 25 rubles to cover the costs of the Sidarim and of Yantif. If he comes back, he comes back. Another example of a Morahara, Posek, a Halacha, who understands that when you're presented with a Shaila, it doesn't just mean to answer the question, but it means that there's certain things that are being asked that aren't necessarily being spoken and understood, and therefore that's what a Posek has to do. So when you're asking me what is Halacha, Halacha means doing what you're supposed to do, following what it is that it says in Shulchan Aruch, Torah, Beis Yosef, Rambam, the Rif, etc. We could go through all of the Nosei Kalim, the Gedolei Rabbanim, and the Klalei Apsak. But really what it boils down to is that there are 2 aspects. There is that a Jew, and a God-fearing Jew, and a Jew who wants to abide by the halacha, wants to do what it says. And often what it says is not always what you're supposed to do. And therefore, that's when we come into the sort of dichotomy and the balance between asking a shayla, knowing halacha, and understanding how to have a relationship with the Rav and a posek in terms of going about doing what you're supposed to do, al pi halacha.
So we really just broadened very much and kind of shattered my dreams as to what it takes to become a qualified rabbi. To get smicha, I mean, my brain's leaping to this. Smicha, I guess, means you've been anointed to become a rabbi, you've been knighted, and you can answer shilos. But I guess now it takes a lot more to get smicha. How does one actually, now if I want to become a rabbi, how do you become someone that's reputable as to also know the back and forth? How am I supposed to be vetted as somebody that is good at interpersonal relationships? How do you add that to smicha?
We'll be back after a quick break.
Be sure to subscribe to the Motivation Congregation on WhatsApp, where you can wake up on a highlight every single day with a Torah talk that is crafted to inspire and enlighten. You can join the broadcast list on WhatsApp and receive the videos directly to your WhatsApp inbox every single day. Plus, when you join on WhatsApp, you can stream the Motivation Congregation WhatsApp status that has all access to great newly published Sefarim book reviews. You can watch the weekly trips to the Sefarim store to stay in the know about all things of Torah literature, plus with behind-the-scenes looks, bonus content, and deep dives into great Torah sages' private lives. When we discuss them on their yard sites, there is a lot going on, and you can scroll down to find the link to join us on WhatsApp. I hope that you do, and I hope that you'll reach out and say hello. And once again, now back to the show, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this episode.
It's a good question, because as you pointed out, historically, the way that it worked, traditionally, the traditional form for answering shilas was through smicha. Moshe Rabbeinu was somech Yeshua, Yeshua's kenim, kenuvim, anshei knesses hagdola, and there was an absolute formula for smicha. That ended. When it ended exactly is a debate in the Rishonim, but certainly smicha, the concept and the construct and the parameters that we have of smicha, of Moshe Kibul Tar Misim Yisrael Yeshua, and when the pasuk says in Parshas Pinchas that Moshe was somech Yeshua, that no longer exists. What we do have today is what we call a heta hara. That's the way the Rambam and other poskim refer to it, that a rabbi who has the skill, the quality, the knowledge to be able to paskin shaylos means that there's a rav who also is a reputable person who has his rabbanim, who gave him a heta hara, continuously passing down a tradition where that individual not only is vetted for their halachic knowledge, that they know and they understand Gemara, Rishonim, Psak Halacha, but also that they're an individual who has an understanding, appreciation for Shimush. Shimush means that I sat by a Rav, I listened and I heard and I debated and I deliberated and I worked things out. Now, of course, once somebody has smicha, doesn't mean that you could just answer shaylas. Certainly, there's a greater level of understanding that's necessary just by receiving a piece of paper or not even receiving a piece of paper. But any Rav has his Rav and Rav has his Rav. So there needs to be an ongoing relationship and a growing understanding of what it is that is being asked of you, like I referred to from the Beis Halevi and from the Reb Tzvi Pesach Rank. And you could see this from Gedolei Rabbanim in Tshuvas. When they write careful analysis of a shaila, there are many intangibles that exist in the shaila, and that's the reason, maybe we'll talk about it, the advantage of asking a shaila in person, a face-to-face communication versus answering shailas either biksav or more modern technology of communication, whether it's text or a WhatsApp or phone calls and the like. There are many different parameters, but certainly Rabbi Salanta writes that anybody who answers shaylas has to have two things. He has to be knowledgeable, he has to know, and he has to be a person who is certainly understanding of Gemara, Rishonim, and Psak Halacha. And more than that, you have to be a person who's mishamesh poskim and understand the ins and outs and understand what's a din, what's the raisa, what's the rabbanon, what's a minug, how the different kalalei hapsak work, how to balance things, what's a minug, what's a chumrah, what's a das yachid, how when the Shulchan Aruch writes something, articulates something, what does it mean? How do we understand the Shulchan Aruch in light of later psakim, the Sma, the Shach, the Taz, the Mishnah Berurah, the Chashulchan? There are so many different.
I got it. So there's so much going on here. So it gets this kind of one of the things about halacha that becomes so challenging is that it is, you can pretty much, seems like, have multiple opinions on any said question. You could also have different mesoras and different minhagim, which I know you know a lot about, Rabbi. So there's a lot going on. I still want to have that chance to now that we know that there's even more confusion now in halacha, because we also have to have the right role and the right understanding of the rabbi, who's the answerer, and the congregant or the said questioner. He also has to ask properly. There's a lot going on. I still want to have that chance to now actually define exactly what is halacha, understand who's in charge of this entity called halacha. When the world this word halacha actually means, to me it means going, like holech means to go. But really try to build it up as clearly as possible here. Rabbi, all I know is that there's the 5 books of Moses, there's a Pentateuch. Where does halacha fit into all that?
Right, Yisro in Parshas Yisro tells Moshe Rabbeinu that in order to execute proper it can't be that Moshe Rabbeinu just has to be the one to answer all shaylas. It's an impossibility. Can't hold Moshe Rabbeinu responsible to deal with all of Klal Yisrael. So Yisro understood that had to be a davar gadol and a davar katan. There are heavyweight shaylas that Moshe has to deal with. Easier, simpler shaylas. There's a Sanhedrin, there's a Bezin, there's Shivim Zakanim. So from the time of Kabbalah Torah Matan Torah, so by the time we were given the Taryag Mitzvos and the Aseret Adibros, we needed to know how to do what it is that we were supposed to do. The Torah doesn't always define exactly what it is that we're supposed to do. We're coming off of Parshas Eikev, so the pasuk says V'yachalta v'savata v'rachta, 3 words. What does that mean? That means you have to bench. So the Torah doesn't tell me what to bench, how to bench, how many passages of the Raisa, how many brachos of the Raisa, what's the Raisa, what's the Rabbanim. I
thought you were going to say the other one. I thought that was such a cool Rashi last week. It said that you should shecht an animal, slaughter an animal exactly as I told you. That's what, right? So but then God doesn't tell us anywhere.
This is what Torah Shabbat Peh is all about, and that's
clearly right.
Rabbi Yehuda Nassi, Rabbi Rav Ashi, established exactly what it was that the Torah tells us, like we saw, that Chazal were given the ability, the power, and the teeth in order to concretize what it is that it says in Torah Shabbat. So therefore, by the time of the Mishnayos and the Gemara and the Gaonim and the Rishonim and what the Gedolei Rabbanim have been doing for Dorei Doros is being able to exercise the koach that they have to establish, explain what it is that Rabbi Walter was telling Moshe Rabbeinu. That's what the Tanaim and Amoraim are doing, and that wasn't even enough, because after the Tanaim and Amoraim, that's when the codes of Jewish law began. The Tanaim and Amoraim wrote the back and forth, the dialogue, and the communication that took place between the Tanaim and Amoraim. But if I just have Shas, so I don't necessarily know what to do and how to do it. So therefore, in the times of the Gaonim already, we started seeing Tshuvas and Psakim that were written down in order for communities to know what to do and how to do it. And that continues out of Yom Hazeh for the last 1,000 years. We continue to establish, to write, to concretize, and to explain exactly what it is that we're supposed to do. Torah tells us kan tzipur, is a mitzvah of shiluach hakein. The Torah is 3-4 psukim parshas kisei about that. So how do I fulfill the mitzvah of shiluach hakein? So, you can take a look today. There are 2 or 3 kitzur svarim all about the mitzvah of shiluach hakein. Why is that necessary? Because if you just learn the psukim in parshas kisei, you're going to be left and lost, confused. Are we talking about a kosher bird or not a kosher bird? Is it a bird in your backyard or a bird in your front yard? Where's the nest? What type of nest? What type of... So there are many different factors that need to be taken into account, and hopefully a proper posek knows how to mirror Torah Shebechsav and Torah Shebal Peh in order that it should be an explanation and an exposition elucidating what it is that Torah Shebechsav is supposed to do. And
How come, this has me guessing, how come the great Rav Meir and Rabbi Yehuda HaNassi didn't just write down the practical halacha?
We'll be back after a quick break.
Just a quick pause here for some station identification. Thanks for listening to the Motivation Congregation podcast. Hope you are enjoying this episode. Be sure to like, rate, review, subscribe, all that good jazz. And definitely be sure to scroll down and check out the sponsors of the show and the sponsors of this episode. When you support them, you support the show. And thank you for your listenership. Thank you for your engagement. I hope you enjoy this episode. And without further ado, let us return to the scheduled programming.
For exactly this reason, that really halacha was supposed to be Torah Shebal Peh. It was supposed to be taught from Rebbe to Talmud and Talmud to Talmud. It wasn't supposed to be written down. Rabbi Yehuda HaNassi had a heter. The pasuk says, we were forced to write it down because the Galus...
So write down halacha. So once there's a Eis Lasos, there's a time of need. Let's do it.
We could write down the sodos, but we can't write down the exact, absolute, final rulings about everything. Now, the truth is,
why not?
If one understands Gemara properly, so the Piskei Halacha often mirror what it is. And we know we have Klalim and Shas. How do you paskin? Machlokas Besil Beishamas, Machlokas Rabbi Lazar B'Yeshua. There are Klalei HaPsak. And there are great svarim in Klalei HaPsak that describe to us. The Rif has Klalim, the Beis Yosef has Klalim, the Shulchan Aruch has Klalei HaPsak. But that begins to water down the process. So much so you should be familiar. I don't know if your listeners are familiar with this. When the Shulchan Aruch of Yosef Karo codified the Shulchan Aruch, it was taken to task. It was met with tremendous opposition. How could it be that there's an individual who would attempt to codify, to organize, and to concretize all Psak Halacha into 4 volumes?
What's the problem with that? Why not?
So the Maharsha actually explains in Maseches Sot and Avchav Beis that...
That's in your book, right at the beginning. That's in your book.
In one of the chapters, I think I referred to this Maharsha, that somebody who does that is called Mabelei Ha'olam, is considered to be somebody who is a destroyer of the world. Because the way that halacha is supposed to work, the way that Torah is supposed to work, the way Torah Shebal Peh is supposed to work, is that there's supposed to be a relationship, really face-to-face communication, like we described, what it was that Yisro suggested to Moshe Rabbeinu. That's the ultimate dialogue communication in terms of how we're supposed to distill what it is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe Rabbeinu, Ad Hayom Hazeh. Because we were unable to do that, and because of dispersion, because of galus, and because of pogroms and death and destruction, the Crusades and the Inquisition, So a lot of the Masorah and Klal Yisrael was lost. And as a result, we needed to define, to identify, and to articulate exactly what the final Psak Halacha was. Now, the Pesach Tshuva actually writes that even though the Maharsha says that writing and organizing and concretizing Psak Halacha L'maisa, like the Tanoim did in the Mishnayos, is considered to be destroying the world, once they're now Nosei Kelim on the Shulchan Aruch, and there are commentaries and super commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch, we now understand the background in terms of what the Psak Halacha is. The problem with simply writing the bottom line is that's very base and that's very elementary, and we can't understand the complexities and the background of where the Psak Halacha is coming from. So if you're just reading a simple Psak in Shulchan Aruch, so you're missing the boat, and you could be somebody who really doesn't understand and appreciate the background, then you're just issuing Piskei Halacha is going to water down Halacha, and it's not allowing the richness and the nuances of Halacha to come alive. So therefore, once there were Nosei Kelim and super commentaries written in Shulchan Aruch, now there's a Taz, there's a Shachan Yer, there's a Magen Avram, and a Tazim Magen Avram, there's a Sman, a Drisha, and Prisha. So therefore, we could start to understand the background much, much better, and therefore, Shulchan Aruch became much more widely accepted.
I got it. Have you ever heard of the theory or the idea that the reason why just the minimum klalim, the general principles of halacha, just that was written over was because the heter, the permission to write down Torah, was given over only what was needed, so we could only give over the minimum amount, but any extra would be prohibited? Have you heard of such a theory?
I think it's what we've been discussing, that really, and this is so lost today because we find ourselves in the Galus, and everything is written down, which is necessary today. And Tshuvas Svarim have, been critical in terms of distilling and explaining and issuing Piskei Halacha for 1,000 years, from the Rishonim to the Achronim to contemporary poskim. But really, that's not the way it's supposed to be, and people don't understand that. That's not the way that it was intended. It was intended to be like the Mishnah says in Ahavas, that there's supposed to be an oral communication from Rebbe to Talmud, from parent to child, and that's really the way it worked. That's always the way it worked. And only because of the loss of Masorah, that changed. So therefore, yes, on a certain level, even the Mishnayos were written very terse. But when that didn't even work, Ravina Rav Ashi had to come and they had to elaborate and clarify. And even once the Gemara was written, we needed the Rishonim to explain what it was that the Gemara said. And that continues and continues ad yom hazeh.
So the increasing of literature and the more of it is almost sadly like a sign of the times.
So I would say both. On the one hand, it's awesome because the proliferation of Svarim and Psak Halacha speaks to the fact that Klal Yisrael is so interested in the intricacies and the minutia of Halacha. Like I just pointed out, there's an entire sefer written on halachas of Kan Tzipor, there's an entire sefer written on halachas of Ksiva Sefer Torah.
Chafetz Chaim, right, on Lashon Hara. Right?
Absolutely. So that goes to show that Klal Yisrael is very, very interested. Arguably, the average Balabas today is much, much more knowledgeable than the average Balabatim of hundreds of years ago and thousands of years ago. We have access to so much more literature and information, understanding, and shiurim, and so therefore it's an amazing thing that Klal Yisrael is saying explicitly, implicitly, we want to learn, we want to understand, we want to do what's correct. Mitzad Sheni, yes, there is a certain limit and a certain problem because really we shouldn't be, we could talk about this, we shouldn't be answering shilas from opening up a Kitzur Sefer. That's not the way it's supposed to work. There should be a Rav involved, and we could talk about that relationship.
We'll talk about that. So we'll talk about that because I know that there's a lot that goes into that. And I also I'd love to hear your, you were talking about it a little bit before we started this interview, and I was going over some of the notes from your book. It's very clear your perhaps a very important that message that needs to be heard about halacha, and I can't wait to get to that. I want to start now with, so now we have Torah must be written down, and we have the Mishnah, and we have the Gemara. So I believe there are three titans, or maybe it's a fantastic four great scholars that are the Mount Rushmore, for lack of a better metaphor and analogy, that is in charge of halacha. The big ones, as you put it, seem to be the Rambam, Maimonides, the great Reb Yitzchak Alfasi. I think both of those are from Spain. The Rosh, I don't know where he's from, but I know he's in the back of my Gemara. And then the Tur, who writes a lot of Some, I guess they're found in every single bookshelf. I don't really know much about the Torah at all, actually. Is that it? It's the Rambam, Rif, Rosh, and Torah. Those are the pillars of halacha, Rabbi?
A pretty accurate statement, yes. Certainly the Rif and the Rosh and the Rambam and the Torah are the go-to and the default, the backbone of Psak Halacha.
Why do we need four? Why do we need four? Why couldn't just Rambam do it and everyone would live happily ever after?
So the truth is, it's not exactly four, and indeed the Beis Yosef himself says that he looks to three of those four. He looks to the Rif, the Rambam, and the Rosh in terms of identifying Psak Halacha, and he writes in his introduction, the Beis Yosef, which is Rabbi Yosef Karo, ultimately from the Beis Yosef emerged the Shulchan Aruch, is that anytime 2 out of 3 of those giants take one position, he's going to paskin like that. Now, more often than not, the Beis Yosef paskins like the Shitas Rambam. However, the Rambam traditionally is the psak of Sfard, and that's the Mechaber, the Shulchan Aruch, and the Ramah basis is psakim more on the Balei Tosos and the Rosh. So very often we find that there's machloksim between the Rambam and the Rosh, or the Rambam and the Rif against the Rosh and the Balei Tosfos. So that really gives a picture.
Where should Rosh live as opposed to the Rif and the Rambam?
So the Rambam was a great Egyptian rabbi. The Rif was Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi, was a great, that's where he was from Fez and from Morocco.
Fez, right.
And the Rosh and the Balei Tosos were of Ashkenaz descent, France, Provence, Germany. And therefore there are different approaches in terms of how they're going to deal with Psak Halacha based upon who they're looking to. And the Rambam is the Psak of Sfard and became the Psak of Sfard of Egypt, Mesopotamia, Eretz Yisrael, and in those areas, while the Rosh and the Balei Tosos became the Psak of Ashkenaz. And very, very regularly and very often, those who are familiar, those of your listeners are familiar from understanding, Gemara, realize that very regularly there'll be machloks between the Rambam and the Tosfos. There'll be a machloks between Tosfos and the Rambam in terms of how they understand the Gemara. And that ipso facto is going to create very often machlokas between the Mechaber and the Ramah. That's sort of the broad strokes in distilling how one will see a Shulchan Aruch. If you see a machlokas between the Mechaber and the Ramah, 99 or 9 out of 10 times the Mechaber, the Rabbi Yosef Karo's psak, which is a psak of Sfardim, will be based upon the Rambam and the Rif, and the Ramah in his gloss in the Shulchan Aruch will base his psakim upon the Rosh and other Balei Tosos. That's more often how it boils down.
Fascinating. I see often in Ashkenaz. So I guess let's get into that. So we have those 3 main players, the 3 main those that codified halacha. The Rif, well, they all took different approaches towards halacha, right? The Rif, I believe, he piggybacked on the Gemara and kind of made a easy to read summary of halacha of the Gemara. Am I correct with that? That's what he wrote.
So one way to differentiate between the way that the Rambam and let's say the Rosh worked as opposed to the Rif and the Tur is that the Rambam really gives just the bottom line. The Rambam, which is the challenge of learning the Rambam, is the reason why there's so many Mefarshim in the Rambam, the Maggid Mishnah, the Kesef Mishnah, and the Lechem Mishnah most prominently, is because we don't know, and the Rambam didn't explain to us where he was coming from. So therefore, that's the reason we need major Nosei Kelim commentaries and super commentaries in the Rambam. So that's all the Rambam did. The Rosh similarly did that. The Rosh just gave us the bottom line without really getting into the background. So the Rambam and the Rosh share that common denominator in just giving us the final bottom line Psak Halacha without explaining where they were coming from. The Rif, on the other hand,
the Rosh gave a little bit more. Didn't he only write
more than the Rambam?
Sometimes a little more lengthy, right?
Certainly more than the Rambam. But the Rif, the Rif, those familiar with the Rif, that's clearly an extrapolation of the Gemara. And the Rif goes to the Gemara. Now, the Rif will take out a lot of the, the Agada of the Gemara and a lot of the, let's say, much of the back and forth and the dialogue between the Amoraim and the debate, and I'll give you the bottom line, but it's working and it's written al pi seder haGemara, so a lot more background. So therefore, the Rambam is challenging in that respect because you don't always know where the Rambam is coming from, as opposed to the Rif, where we do understand where the Rif's bottom line halacha is coming from.
This makes so much sense. Before I just heard over from the great Chafetz Chaim. He actually said that laymen or working men should if they don't have time to study all of Shas, they should study just the Rif. I think there was something similar said by the Vilna Gaon, because that gives almost like a summary of the conclusions of the Havayos to Abaye Verava.
Yeah, that wasn't an uncommon practice that the Rif was learned as a Seder, and that's the reason why there are many Mefarshim written on the Rif, including most classically the Ran, the Nimukei Yosef, and others, in order to shortline and to streamline the dialogue and communication and the machloksim and the Gemara. You get to the meat and potatoes, let's say, without all of the background and the lumdus, which is critical and important to understanding. But the Rif explains how he gets to where he's going. So that's very important as well.
I found that it's sometimes if I want to sound smart, so when I sometimes if it takes me a long time to get through breaking my teeth on a Masechta, but then I want to give over at the Siyum, after we finish a small little summary of the Masechta, sometimes I'll just go through and you can just all the parts of the Rif, you can almost see every halachic topic and extrapolated law and almost summarize the entire tractate just by studying the Rif. So that's
the Rif certainly does that. And in Halacha, actually, the Tur is very similar, because what the Tur did is that the Tur organized.
So that's the next thing. That's the fourth, Rabbi. So who's the Tur? If he's not part of the big three, what is he?
So the Tur is the son of the Rosh, and the Tur collects the psakim of the Gedolei Rishonim, including the Rambam, the Rif, and the Rosh, and other of the great Ashkenazi Rishonim. And the Tur usually follows the psak of his father, the Tur, but very much leans on the Rambam as well. So therefore, if the person
his father, the Rosh, you meant his father, the Rosh.
Correct, but he also will very much cite almost verbatim, very regularly, the Shittas of the Rambam. And if one learns the Tur, so as opposed to the Rif, which is written al Seder HaGemara, along the chronology of the Gemara and the tractate that's being learned, the Tur does it al Pi Seder, what we would call of Halacha, Orach Chaim, Yoredeach, Choshen Mishpan, Ebezer. That organization really began with the Tur. And if you learn the Tur, a particular siman or a particular section in Halacha, what you'll get is the compilation and the organization and the conclusions of the Gedolei Rishonim, and that becomes the springboard for what the Beis Yosef is going to do to paskin halacha l'maisa. So if in a particular siman or sif, the Tur will quote a Rambam shita is like this, the Rif shita is like this, the Rosh's shita is like this. Tur won't necessarily be machriya. The Tur won't come to a halachic conclusion. Very often you'll say, the psak is like my father, or it's understood in which direction he's going. But that became the basis of many to understand what the broad strokes of what the Gedolei Rishonim and Poskim are saying. And from there, the Beis Yosef would paskin halacha based upon one of the three, like we said, the Rambam, the Rif, or the Rosh.
Mm-hmm. So now we have the Tur, which seems to be well accepted as the go-to halacha because he's drawing from everyone. And the Tur, the super commentary on the Tur is the Beis Yosef. The Beis Yosef is authored by Reb Yosef Cairo, lived about, 500 years ago.
Yes.
He is going to be the monkey wrench in all of this, if pardon the expression. He has authored a great deal on halacha. I know of the Shulchan Aruch is his. I know that the Beis Yosef is his. I know that the Kesef Mishnah, that's one of the super commentaries on the Rambam, is his. Can you help put into perspective all of the different needs that were met by all of the just voluminous literature that was put out by the great Rabbi Yosef Cairo?
Beis Yosef was a giant. Beis Yosef lived in Tzfas amongst the Chachmei HaKabbalah of Tzfas in the 1600s, as you pointed out. And Rabbi Yosef Cairo did something that was arguably changed, rabbinic and Jewish history forever, because what the Shulchan Aruch did, and as I noted, was met with enormous opposition because it was so different. And even though the Tur already began to compile and to organize halacha, what the Shulchan Aruch did was machriya. He paskent, and he wrote and articulated for posterity what exactly a Jew should do. So if there's a shita, the Rambam, the Rosh, and the Rif, and the Tur compiles them all and puts them together, the Shulchan Aruch, based upon his Sefer, the Beis Yosef, which was the running commentary on the Tur, based upon either 2 out of 3 of those poskim which we mentioned, the Rambam, the Rif, and the Rosh, the Beis Yosef said, this is the psak, and this is what's supposed to be done. And that became a enormous sefer, which is the basis.
So Torah Beis Yosef is halacha. Torah Beis Yosef.
Yeah, the Torah is the Torah, and the Beis Yosef is the commentary on the Torah, and then the Shulchan Aruch, which was written by the Beis Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Karo, is based upon his commentary. The Beis Yosef on the Torah became the Shulchan Aruch. So
Why did he write the Shulchan Aruch if he already wrote his halacha of the Beis Yosef?
So the Beis Yosef is much longer, much lengthier. It also cites very, very directly from the poskim, the Rambam, the Rif, and the Rosh, and therefore it's a shorthand book. It's sort of like the Cliff Notes, the bottom line, the end all be all of what you have to do. So if a person is not a scholar and can't go through the Rambam, the Rif, the Rosh, the Torah, the Beis Yosef, so I could skip all that and go right to the Shulchan Aruch, and every Jew will know what he is supposed to do. And that's exactly what the Shulchan Aruch, Yosef Kar, writes in his introduction to Shulchan Aruch. By the way, your listeners should be aware that it's very important. Each of these great Rabbanim wrote introductions to their Sfarim and explained to us exactly what they're doing. So much of what I'm sharing with you is based upon the introductions of the Rambam, the Rif, the Torah, the Beis Yosef, the Shulchan Aruch. They explained exactly what it was that they were doing. Mm-hmm. In my book, actually, in the back,
listeners, I got to interrupt, Rabbi. Listeners, they're all this is printed in the back of Rabbi Walter's book. You don't need to buy all of the Beis Yosef and Shulchan Aruch. Just buy Rabbi Walter's, at least one of his 3 books, and you're going to get it all. Sorry for interrupting you, Rabbi.
No, thank you.
Just a quick plug there. I apologize. You were telling us all about the need to go to the Shulchan Aruch, which is a summary, and the point of it he writes in his introduction. He writes this in his introduction, the point of the Shulchan Aruch?
Yeah, absolutely. But this was exactly the point that was met with opposition and contention, because the colleagues and the Rabbanim who challenged Rav Yosef Karo said that that's not the intent of what it was that halacha is supposed to be. It's not just supposed to be, you open up a book and you know what you're supposed to do. There's supposed to be a lot of complexity and color and understanding of where the halacha is coming from. And if the Shulchan Aruch just writes one line, you're missing. What does the Gemara say? What do the Rishonim say? What's the machlokas, the Rambam? And you're missing all that. And that's actually exactly where the Vilna Gaon entered, writing his classic Bir Agra on the Shulchan Aruch, was coming to show the sources of Rav Yosef Karo. And that was really his goal. And you could take a look at his introduction as well.
I have this circled in my notes. I'm dying to know everything about the Bir Hagra, this Pirish, because the Shulchan Aruch and the Torah, these are in yeshiva, these are the go-tos. This is anyone who wants to get the flavor. I mean, I'm still enamored every single time I open up the Beis Yosef. Just the fact that he can put all that into a paragraph, summarize something that took us 6 months to learn, and there it is in one paragraph is just beyond, and he didn't even live that long ago. And then the Vilna Gaon, living 300 years ago, wrote a commentary. Rabbi, whenever I look down and get excited because everything of the yeshiva movement is from the Vilna Gaon, I can never understand one line of what the Vilna Gaon's commentary on Shulchan Aruch has to say. So
the Vilna Gaon, of course, wrote very terse and very, very minimally. And that's the way the Gra worked. And the Gra wrote on Kol HaTorah Kula. There was almost no area of rabbinic literature that the Gra didn't touch or didn't write on, from Torah Shabbosav to Torah Shabbal Peh. The key, if somebody wants to know if they understood the Shulchan Aruch and understood the sugya that they were learning, is learning a Bir Agra. Because that's gold. Let's put that on a billboard. Why is that? That's gold. Why does it make any sense? What the Gra did in very few words and very few sentences was to explain the entire sugya with the Gemara, with the Rishonim. And he'll explain to you very terse exactly where the Shulchan Aruch Psak Halach is coming from. And if he disagrees with the Shulchan Aruch, he'll make that sometimes clear and sometimes less clear. And that takes a lot of scholarship to understand how to learn the Gra. And there are many great Sfarim written on the Bir Gra. But the Gra, the goal of the Bir Gra, and the truth is this is the goal of the Gra in almost all areas of his writing, is to show how everything comes back to Torah Shebechsav. Everything comes back to a word, to a pasuk, or to a line in the Gemara. And therefore, if a person is able to understand what the Gemara writes, let's say on a Sif and Shulchan Aruch, the Gemara writes, "Harambam delo kehatosvos al pi menachos yudalet." Those 5 words sum up the entire sugya. So if you understand what the Gemara wrote, that means you understood the Gemara, you understood there's machlokes Rishonim, you understood that there's a machlokes Rishonim, you understood how the Shulchan Aruch is paskening, and you understand if the Gemara agreed or disagreed with the assertion of the Shulchan Aruch. So the Biur Gemara is critical in paskening many Gedolim. From Rozovsky, for example, the Panamich Rosh Yeshiva, if somebody would ask him a shaila, he would look at the Shulchan Aruch and the Gemara. The Gemara was like his Kitzur Sefer. Because if a person understands the Gra, you understand the entire sugya. And there are many, many classical songs that were written on the Gra. The Mesach Eliezer, for example.
Who wrote these works on the Gra?
The Mesach Eliezer is one of the classic works, which was written on the Vilna Gaon. His name escapes me right now.
When did he live? I mean, after the Gra.
About 100 years after the Vilna Gaon. And it's a running commentary opening up the Vilna Gaon. Because the Gra wrote so bekitzer, so that the Mesach Eliezer does, and what other Sfarim on the Gra did, is to open up and to explain what the intent of the Gra was. The Gra didn't have time or interest, and he was really Torah Shabbat Peh at the greatest. You want to understand what I'm saying? You have to work. But not everybody has that ability, and therefore many Sfarim have been written from Gedolei Israel trying to explain what it was exactly that the Gra is doing. And as I said, if you understand the Gra, you understand the Sugya.
To follow, Rabbi, that makes a lot of sense now. We have an obsession with Reb Yerucham Levovitz of Yeshivas Mir here on this podcast, mostly because it's a Musar podcast. But I remember reading about him that he spent 8 years preparing to become a mashgiach. So he became well-versed in the Talmud when he learned in Kelm and in Radin it was in Radin actually, underneath the Chavetz Chaim, and with his good friend and his chavrusa, Rav Naftali Trupp, and they spent 8 years learning Gemara and Rashi. I don't remember if they learned Tosfos. They learned the Shulchan Aruch, and they learned it with the Be'er Hagra. And I always never knew why they learned that, like how they could get anything out of it. But I mean, obviously, it makes a lot of sense now that you're saying that. It's also just with regards to Elul. I was just looking up the laws of it's in Siman 581. What is that? Tuf Kuf Pei Aleph, I think. And they're all talking. All the Nosei Kalim in the tour. They're all explaining that Elul is a special time, and the words of the Be'er Hagra read something like Mordechai, Reish, Masechta Rosh Hashanah, V'Ritva Sham, and then he writes at the end, Lehem Yemei Haratzon. Something where I think that's really where all of Elul comes in, and I was never I think there's some sort of gold mine there in the Vilna Gaon of Elul as Yemei Haratzon and what that means of days of want, who wants what. But either way. Now I have it's going to have to be another podcast. So now we have the tour and we have the Be'er Hagra, and you have me fascinated. So where does our good friend and our original standing up for Ashkenaz Psak, the great Rambam, come in? When does he overlap with the Mechaber, being the Beis Yosef? Does he write on the Beis Yosef? I know that he writes the Ramah on top of the Shulchan Aruch. Where does Rav Moshe Isser List, the great Ramah, come into this?
First work was not actually on the Shulchan Aruch, it was actually on the tour. You're correct. The Ramah wrote a sefer called the Darkei Moshe, and the Darkei Moshe is a running commentary on the tour. And what the Darkei Moshe did was to point out what the Ashkenaz Rishonim posit on a particular psak halacha if the tour didn't note what some of the Balei Tosfos, the Manig, the Aguda, and other Gedolei psak of Ashkenaz. That was the goal of the Ramah. So if the Ramah disagrees with the assertion and the psak of the tour or the citations of the tour, the Darkei Moshe will make that very clear. And more often than not, if you move a generation later to the Sefer, the Shulchan Aruch, and the Ramah, it's very clear that they are coming from exactly what they wrote in their Torah, the Beis Yosef and the Darkei Moshe. So what the Ramah does on the tour with his Darchei Moshe is exactly what the Ramah does on the Shulchan Aruch, and that is point out psak halacha for Ashkenaz where it differs from what the Mechaber says. So the Ramah is not going to write on every single sif of the Shulchan Aruch, because there are many times that the Ramah will agree with the psak of the Shulchan Aruch, the Rambam, the Rif, and the Rosh. But if there's ever a point where the Ramah understands that the Shulchan Aruch didn't take into account the psak of the Gedolei Ashkenaz or the Rosh enough, the Darchei Moshe will make that very clear, and therefore it will be articulated halacha in the Shulchan Aruch. The Ramah is called the mappa. The mappa is sort of like the cloth, the tablecloth, the covering on the Shulchan Aruch, because without the Ramah, so an Ashkenaz Jew can't properly execute psak halacha just by relying only on the Shulchan Aruch, because then you're missing all of the Gedolei Ashkenaz. So therefore, what we're left with, if you open up the Shulchan Aruch, is that you have the Shulchan Aruch, which is the backbone of all halacha, and any time there's a difference between that which the Shulchan Aruch says, then the Ramah will make that very clear, and therefore, when a Rav is issuing a psak halacha, he has to know, is he answering a Sfaradi, is he answering an Ashkenazi, to know if the Ramah more often than not is actually being machmir on the things that the Shulchan Aruch says, and therefore a Rav also has to know, are the chumras of this particular psak of the Ramah something that everybody has to follow. There are exceptions to the rule, and therefore that, again, gets back into what we started with, the complexities of issuing and paskening halacha l'maisa.
So I think there's one last step here, which is, most people that I know that learn halacha, they're not necessarily learning the Beis Yosef, or they're not necessarily learning the Shulchan Aruch with the Ramah, but they're obsessing over the commentary and the halachic work called the Mishnah Brura. And if they're not learning that, then they're learning the Aruch HaShulchan. So what exactly are those two, and how do they differ, and where do they fit into this large picture, mosaic of halacha?
So the truth is that there's even a lot between, the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah and getting to Mishnah Brura and the Aruch HaShulchan. That is commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah, including those that I noted. In Orach Chaim, it's the Taz and the Magen Avram. In Yerdea, it's the Taz and the Shach. In Choshen Mishpat, it's the Sma and the Shach. And in Even Ezra, it's the Chalkas Mechokek. So therefore, there are commentaries and super commentaries. The Prima Gaonim, the Vilna Gaon are all commenting on the Shulchan Aruch. So therefore, you're left with the psakim of the Shulchan Aruch, and then the Taz and the Shach and the Magen Avram and the other Gedolei HaPoskim are arguing, debating what it is that the Shulchan Aruch said. Do they agree? Do they disagree? And they're bringing out the rich machlokes that exists in Mishnayos and Gemara that continues with the Shulchan Aruch and the Torah and the Beis Yosef. The Mishnah Brura used all of the Gedolei, and this the Mishnah Brura writes in his introduction as well. The benefit of using the Mishnah Brura is that the Mishnah Brura looked at the Gra and at the Pri Megadim most prominently, but also had all of the literature that took place between the writing of the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah up until the Chavetz Chaim died in 1933. All of those Sfarim and the Mishnah Brura, the Chavetz Chaim, collected all of that, and based upon 200, 300, 400 years of written rabbinic literature, the Mishnah Brura Chavetz Chaim makes it very clear how exactly one should paskin. Now, that doesn't mean it's easy to open up a Mishnah Brura and paskin halacha l'maisa, even though the Mishnah Brura Chavetz Chaim understood that his sefer should be used halacha l'maisa. That's clear. But nonetheless, you have to know how to learn Mishnah Brura. Mishnah Brura also takes a lot of scholarship to understand.
It's not so easy.
Very difficult sefer, and a person has to know how to learn the Mishnah Brura and how the Mishnah Brura writes. And there could be that there are klalim also. I write about that in my sefer, how to learn the Mishnah Brura and how the Mishnah Brura is indicating how he's paskening. That takes a lot of understanding. But the Mishnah Brura, for most, is considered to be what we would call the posek achron. Is sort of like the final end all and be all. That's not to say that we don't agree with everything that the Mishnah Brura says. The Chazon Ish argued with the Mishnah Brura, and there are many psakim of the Mishnah Brura that we debate and we haggle but the godless of the Mishnah Brura to write a running commentary on all of Orach Chaim, which includes the psakim of hundreds of Gedolei HaPoskim of 500 years before, is a sefer that has to be taken with significant weight. And Gedolei Yisrael of the last 100 years really made the Mishnah Brura what it is today, and that's the reason that we, at least in the world of Ashkenaz, look to the Mishnah Brura with extraordinary weight and look to the Mishnah Brura.
So what's the Aruch HaShulchan then?
Aruch HaShulchan was written a little bit before the Mishnah Brura. Epstein was the Rav of Vardik, and as opposed to Mishnah Berurah, which was a running commentary in Shulchan Aruch, the Aruch Shulchan wrote a separate sefer, and what he does differently is actually that he summarizes a lot of the background to the Psak Halacha. So what the Mishnah Berurah doesn't do is exactly what the Aruch Shulchan does, is that the Aruch Shulchan will go back to the Gemara, he'll review the Gemara, and the Rif, the Rambam, and the Rosh, and the Torah, and the Beis Yosef, and the Shulchan Aruch, and the Nosei.
Really?
Yeah, and then he often will say, can't say always, but the Rosh was much more innovative and creative, I would say, than the Mishnah Berurah, and he was a very big mechadesh. In a very interesting interview, I'll point this out, Reb David Feinstein and Reb Ruvain Sheyechia were asked discussing the differences, similarities in Mishnah Berurah and the Aruch Shulchan, and they noted both that their father looked to the Aruch Shulchan more because the Aruch Shulchan was a practicing Rav, as opposed to Chavetz Chaim, who wasn't, and therefore he said the Chavetz Chaim was more machmir. But the Aruch Shulchan was a practicing Rav. He's the Rav of the city of Navardik. His psakim have to be taken with significance because he was dealing with people. Now, you could see that Rabbi Moshe throughout his life began to look to the Mishnah Berurah more as time went on in America. But nonetheless, it's a significant difference between the Mishnah Berurah and the Aruch Shulchan. Mishnah Berurah, by the way, people might not be familiar, was written with a group, and there was peer review. The Mishnah Berurah had chaburas who were learning together sugya, and they worked together through the sugya. Aruch Shulchan was a Rav who was writing independently, and he was a Gaon Adir, and he didn't necessarily have that same level of peer review, if we were to say like that. And he often says many, many great chidushim.
Oh, wow. I remember hearing one time that it was once I think the Chavetz Chaim had a son-in-law who died young, maybe, and they would learn together, and he was a brilliant genius along with his father-in-law, and they were poured over one topic or one line in the Mishnah Berurah for like 8 hours, how to word the writing for that one halacha so that every single part of the halacha could be encompassed inside of that one line. So
look, the Mishnah Berurah had a son, Rabbi Leib, and he writes a biography of his father. It's found in the Kol Kisvei Chavetz Chaim. It's called Demus Diyukno Shel Aviv, and there he has some examples of how exactly the Mishnah Berurah was written and certain sections of the Mishnah Berurah written, and clearly it was taken with enormous seriousness. And it wasn't written in Seder Aleph Beis Gimel Dal Hey Vav. There were different sections that were being worked on at different times, and Chelik Aleph didn't come out first. But there were groups, chaburas, that were working on the sugyas, that were learning them bi'iyun, and then that's how the Mishnah Berurah was written.
That'd be interesting, just to do a whole podcast on the history of how the Mishnah Berurah came to be and how it came to be written and how to learn it. I want to move now to part two, which is now that all the information is available and accessible, we've pretty much just relatively replaced a Seilich Rav. We've kind of made rabbis out of a job, because unless we're going to pour out our hearts and emotional problems to them and complain that we don't get the Shlishi Aliyah, what exactly is the point of high paying a rabbi? I could just open
you
up
said it yourself. Yeah, no, you said it yourself. So the Mishnah tells us to say l'charav is talik min asafik, which the Rishonim and the Mishnayos and Ahavas learn that you need a rabbi and you need a rav to issue and to paskin for you. I'll start with a story. Maybe I'll share with you another story. Just happened just the other day. The same day, two shilas that came my way. One woman called me with something which was very complex and complicated. Unfortunately, it was too late. It was after the fact. She didn't call me in time. This wasn't a simple treifus shaila. It wasn't a yardei or a chaim shaila. It was something much more complicated and complex. And it was a very good example, unfortunately, of somebody who didn't ask a rav shaila and made a tremendous error, and wasn't the type of thing that was so easy to clean up right away. So it's not that just open up a book. Not everything is written in a book, and there are a lot of other areas that need to be taken into account, and that wasn't. On the flip side, the very same day, a woman called me, and before engaging in a particular matter, she asked the shaila, and that allowed me to sort of bring out other issues and allowed me to share information with her that she wasn't even privy to, she wasn't aware of. And when she asked me shaila A, I was able to point out two or three other very critical components that she should address, similar to the stories we started with Beis Levi and the Har Tzvi with Tzvi Pesach. So and I could follow up now. So when you develop a relationship, it was Rabbi Yashiv who pointed out, that's not just a she'el and a tshuva. It's not just a cold question and answer, but there's a shoyel and a meishiv. There's the questioner and the respondent. The famous tshuvas of the Sholem Meishiv at Nothausen. There's not just a simple question and a black and white answer, but there's the person asking the question, and there's the Rav who's answering the question. There's so many nuances and complexities in every shayla that comes up. If you want, a good example of this might be, I think most understand that if you treif up kli cheres, an earthenware porcelain dish, so there's nothing you can do. It's stuck, you're lost, you have to throw it out unless you're machzir to the kipshon, you return it to the kiln. So Moshe is a tshuva about a family who were returning to Yiddishkeit, where we're coming from, and they had a very expensive set of porcelain of China. And the question was, potentially the rabbi asked Moshe, if you're going to tell them that they can't use this set of china, I don't know if they're going to go through and continue in their process of becoming more frum. And Moshe addresses this question, and in amazing form, as Moshe, who knew Kolatar Kula, pulls out tshuvas and psakim of the Rishonim, Shita Bala Itter, Shita Dar, of the Chacham Tzvi and others, and explains that mipnei takanas hashavim after lahakel. And that means is that we're concerned that this family won't proceed in their tshuva and they're not going to become frum. We have to take out from the deck of cards all possible kulas in order to help this family get where they need to get. So it doesn't say that anywhere. How do you know that? You have to be a posek mufak to be able to distill and to know how and when to issue kulas and which kulas to rely on, and the concept of takanas hashavim, and when you could be makel for bali tshuva, and when you could be makel for one person, machmir for somebody else. That takes a lot of scholarship and knowledge, understanding of mishnayos, of gemara, of rishonim, of poskim, of everything that we discussed, and understanding what's mikra din, what's a chumrah, what's a kula, what's the iraisa, what's the rabbanon, what's a das yachid, what's a minhag, and that requires a lot of knowledge to be able to get there.
So a person needs to have a Rav. I got it. There's a Mishnah, and also there's a lot more that goes into it, more than just the letter of the law. What are some wise advice you would give for somebody that is selecting his rabbi?
So the most important thing is having a relationship with the rabbi, Selech Harav, and being open and honest and developing that relationship. Sort of like, a good general practitioner, a doctor, understands not just the specific issue that's being asked, but understands the bigger picture. There's the lungs, there's the kidneys, there's the heart. There's so many things to take into account. A Rav understands who the person is who's asking the shaila. Is this about tshuva? Is this not about tshuva? Is this a person who's struggling with mental health issues or not? Are there emotional, psychological disorders? Is this a person where their financial considerations need to be taken into account? These are all factors in issuing a psak halacha. So yes, there's mutar, there's asa, there's Torah, there's tameh, but there's also sheila and a tshuva and a shoel and a meishiv, and knowing the background and the factors, financial considerations, emotional, psychological disorders, and the gamut of issues that this person is struggling with dealing with. Is he in his parents' home who are not from, might have a different psak halacha than if he's home in his own house where he's able to run things his own way. Today, just Balas Tshuva called, 11th grader in a public school, and asked me a shaila. So what I told her is not what I tell one of my about them in shul, because she can't do everything. And it's an impossibility, and we want to get her there. So therefore, you have to be very careful in terms of saying what to say correctly, appropriately, and of course, being familiar with all the psakim.
And to be a good question asker, that just means being honest. Like, I just got to tell Rabbi all the different...
Not necessarily. The more knowledgeable you are, the better your questions are, right? Like Chazal say, or wherever the saying comes from, Shelas Chacham, Chatzi Tshuva. A person asks a good question, that means you understand and you appreciate. Whenever I teach, I tell people that part of your knowledge base is not to answer a shayla, but to be knowledgeable enough to know when to ask a question. So therefore, the more knowledgeable you are, the more you can ask an intelligent and educated question. So therefore, anybody who's learning and whatever it is that you're doing, the more you know how to ask, what to ask, when to ask. Many people aren't asking shilas because they don't even know what it is a shilah. Many people who are asking shilas are the bigger people who really do know, but they just don't know the bottom line. So therefore, it's critical to be knowledgeable, to be learning. But you can't paskin a shaila from a kitzur sefer. You have to know how to use kitzur svarim too, and that's a whole separate discussion.
I take it that you're not so in favor of people just learning halacha in maybe the said in a shorthand pamphlet of learn Hilchas Shabbos in 1 minute or all of Hilchas Erev in 1 minute. It seems maybe like you're not such a fan of that, Rabbi.
Look, nothing is black and white. There are certainly benefits to the enormous amount of kitzur svarim that exist today, both in Lashon HaKodesh and in English. And not everybody has the benefit of learning Hilchas Shabbos Bien for 4 years. So, the English set of, let's say, Reb Simcha Bunim Cohen in Hilchas Shabbos, 6-7 volumes, has created a revolution and a renaissance in learning halacha and understanding halacha. So I'm certainly a big proponent of that. But a person has to develop over time and hopefully will grow from point A to point B to point C. There are many times that somebody asks me a shaila, so I will rely on a kitzur sefer, but you have to know what the kitzur svarim is quoting, and you look up the primary sources that the kitzur svarim is quoting just regularly. I can't say there's more than 4 or 5 times a week where I'll look in a kitzur sefer, I'll look something up, and the information quoted either wasn't accurate, wasn't correct, or was given with a bend or a slant, or the sefer that was being quoted wasn't a classical sefer to use. So every person has to know how to use shorthand books, when to rely on them, how to rely on them, who the author is, what the author is trying to do, and the more you know, the better you'll be able to issue a responsible psak halacha to the person that you're speaking.
I want to ask controversial, Rabbi. I want to ask controversial, maybe 1 or 2 questions, and then we'll let you go. Otherwise, we'll never let you go. So I once got in trouble when I was a kid because I asked my dad if I could go out past my curfew. And my dad, as the sages say, is a bit more midas hadin than midas harachamim, even though my dad is also midas harachamim. He said, no, it's past your bedtime. And son, you got to march it right upstairs and go to bed. So then I decided I'd ask my mom, because my mom's much more midas harachamim. Not that she also doesn't have a midas hadin side, but I was going for a second opinion from my leaders. So what and if and can I do that if one rabbi tells me that listening to that type of music is prohibited according to halacha, and or insert whatever case, but then another rabbi maybe can let me go ask a second doctor, a second opinion, a second specialist, and get a different psak. Is that allowed?
Yeah. It's an important question. It's a chapter in the book. It's based upon the sugya of Ozar called Chacham Sha'asar, and the Gemara says that once you ask a shaila to a Chacham, to a Rav, to a Posek, and he says that it's asar, you can't go to another Rav to ask the same shaila. That's prohibited. That's asar. Why?
Explicitly prohibited.
Explicitly prohibited. That's the big machlokas Rishonim why, and that's going to have ramifications and applications. Halacha l'maisa. I don't think we could go into that now, but that's the sugya of Chacham Sha'asar. That's number one. Now, if one Rav said it's mutter, it doesn't say that I can't go to another Rav to ask, and I want to be more machmin, that it should be asar. That's not prohibited. But I think what you're asking and what many people are confused by is what we would call, let's say, shopping around for a psak. And that becomes much more complicated. And yes, it does lead to confusion. I will say that if you look in Shuvas, you will see that there was rabbis who asked questions to multiple rabbanim. So if you make it clear at the outset, this is a question I have and I'm going to ask a lot of people, so that is not necessarily prohibited. But if I'm asking a shaila from one rabbi here and one rabbi there, it's really creating a conflict and a lack of confluence in a person's piskei halacha. The same way I can't paskin, Sephardi one day and Ashkenaz another day. Yeah, there has to be a Masorah, and there needs to be uniformity in psak halacha, and that's a big challenge today because people aren't necessarily finding one person to ask. Now, on the other hand, not every Rav is an expert in all areas, and there's a Rav who's an expert in Gittin, there's a Rav who's an expert in Shabbos, there's a Rav who's an expert in Yerodei, and there's a Rav. So yeah, we have to go to experts in different areas, but more often than not, the best thing to do is to ask your Rav, your shaila, and allow the Rav to do the research to take you where it needs to get. Can I point to a siman and sif why it's usher to ask different rabbis the same question or different questions? Not necessarily, but one thing is for sure that if you ask a rabbi a question and the psak is le'esor, you can't ask another rabbi lahakal.
I don't think that it's even that novel or that new, but it's interesting. Just in 5 years now. We celebrated I celebrated my 4th anniversary just a couple weeks ago. And I had an thank you, Rabbi. I had an interesting observation that out of all of my 30 friends, or from my year in yeshiva, everyone kind of moved up levels together, and thank God almost everyone is married and maybe has a child or two, and starting out in a starter home or in a basement. I observed, and I'd like to hypothesize, that those that were able to stay inside of the walls of Torah for a longer period of time are those with Aseh L'Charav that have a clear-cut rabbi.
There's no look. The Mishnah says twice Aseh L'Charav. It says once Aseh L'Charav is stalik min asafek. Make yourself a rabbi, and you won't have doubt, confusion. And it says Aseh L'Charav v'knei l'chachaver. So it says twice Aseh L'Charav in the first parakah of Mishnavos. The Rishonim address why it says it twice, but I think the point that you're making is that Aseh L'Charav is not necessarily the Rav of Psak Halacha, but it's the Rav of giving a person direction, organization, clarity, Masorah, how to live your life. So yes, it could be you have one Rav who has shaylos too, could be you have another Rav who gives you hadrach and direction. More often than not, and sometimes it's the same person. Sometimes it's two different people. Yeshiva has a Rosh Yeshiva has a mashgiach. So there are a lot of different combinations in terms of how a person can, should, and will live their life appropriately, but certainly having direction and having a Masorah and having a Rebbe, Rosh Yeshiva, Mashgiach, a Rav, these are all pieces that allow Klal Yisrael to have the continuity that it does today.
So we've totally taken away the idea, or even it was going to be one of my wacky business ventures of summarizing all of Tur, Shulchan Aruch, Gemara, Rambam, Rif, Mishnah Brura, Taz, Shach, Bach, and Aruch HaShulchan into artificial intelligence, creating like a robot that would know it all. And then I would master all that and put it into a bot and then sell it for $99 a month. Your rabbi from AI. So we're saying that pretty much now that's not going to be a very good product.
The problem with that, and I get this question all the time, many Jewish websites have asked the rabbi, right? So what do I need a rabbi for? I could live in Timbuktu and just ask the rabbi. The answer is, like we've described, that if the rabbi doesn't know you, you're missing an enormous part of the halachic process. And the same thing is true with AI. You could type in your question, you could get an answer, and the answer might be relatively thorough, but you're missing the intangibles. What about the financial considerations? What about the emotional psychological disorders? What about the financial considerations? There are so many different elements about tshuva. Where are you? Who are you? Where are you headed? There are enormous amount of complexities that need to be taken into account. The chumrah, akula, ikar adin, all of these things are not going to be able to be addressed properly because you're only looking at it as a she'el and a tshuva, question and answer, not as a shoel and meshiv, the questioner and the respondent.
So I gotta tank that business idea.
Sorry.
So last question, Rabbi, I promise. So I have 30 minutes a day I can learn halacha. Now I'm overwhelmed. What should I learn? I have 30 minutes a day. I wake up davening. Let's say I'm davening at 7 o'clock if I'm on time. Otherwise, I'll hit up to 7:30 if I make it to that one. So, but either way, I get a half hour before davening. I can learn halacha. What should I learn that lets me know how to act as a proper Jew?
I don't think there's a one answer response. I think it depends who you are. I was
hoping the rabbi wouldn't say that.
It depends who you are and where you're holding your life. I think it's different if you're single, if you're married. If you have a home, there are issues of kashrus, there's issues of taras mishpacha.
I'm married. I have a home. I have 2 children, and I want to know law.
So it probably depends, again, who you are. How are you spending your time? If you're a businessman, so are you familiar with halachas of choshen mishpat? Are you familiar with schiras payalim? Are you familiar with the halachas of shutfus? Maybe you need to learn avas chesed. That's an area that's critical.
One book, Rabbi. What's the one book I could get that the best idea that obviously there's a lot of good ones. Is it Is it Mishnah Berurah? Would you advise Aruch HaShulchan?
Not necessarily either. That's the truth. I think for somebody like that, it could be. It depends what works for you. For one person, might be the English shorthand book, the kosher kitchen. That might be what you need today. For somebody else, it might be the shorthand book on Hilchos Shabbos. For another person, might be going through Mishnah Berurah. The most important thing that needs to be said is there's no one trick and there's no quick fix. And Bezos Hashem, we have till 120, and a person needs to set up a Seder Hayom and needs to set up a schedule and needs to set up goals. And you can't finish everything in a day and not a week and not a month and a year, not in 5 years or in 10 years. But the same way we're going through whatever it is, Mishnayos and Gemara and whatever trying to accomplish and finish, the same thing is true in Halacha. A person has to systematically set up a system, Chazara, Dirshu, whatever the different Kinyanim programs that are out there, a person has to set up a system in all areas of their learning to make sure that they're getting somewhere where they're supposed to get. So I can't tell you if I knew you, maybe I could tell you, and that's where Rav falls in. I could tell you that this is an area that you need to be focusing on, because I see the shaylas you're asking me, you're missing it. You're not getting Hilchos Shabbos at all, or you're not saying the right brachas. So therefore, knowing the individual and knowing where the person is and who they are and what they can do and how much time they have should certainly play a role in knowing what you should be learning. But there's no question that Gedolei Rabbanim, the Mishnah writes in his introduction that person should be spending his time l'sukei shmaitz a little bit of hilchasa. Person should learn halacha. Person should learn practical halacha. Person has to know halacha, and hopefully we'll be able to fulfill Dvar Hashem zu halacha. That's the goal. That's what we're here for. P'siyata d'shmaya, we'll all get there.
Amen, 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 amen. Oh my goodness, Rabbi, I have so many more questions. I'm going to have to let you go. Otherwise, I'm not going to make the mincha. That's the last one before nightfall. But out of your 3 books, we've only touched on part of the chapter. So the audience, this is not a paid promotion. This is a honest person that likes when things make sense, and you can tell that a lot of effort and wisdom is inside of a book. Definitely the audience, it's me talking for myself, should buy The Making of a Halachic Decision. And there is another conversation that I hope we'll have, which we didn't even touch on customs. We didn't even touch on minhagim and where that fits in. And there is another book from Rabbi Walter about that. But hopefully we will wait to talk about that in the coming weeks, if not months, whenever it is that we get Rabbi Walter back on the program. Rabbi Walter, thank you for your time. Thank you for gracing us with your wisdom, and much hatzlacha to you and to your entire family and community.
Great talking to you as always, and I'll look forward to next time in Ritz Hashem.
Amen, amen. I enjoyed that. Like, I could have kept going and going and going.
It's a topic that people are very, very taken by. Anytime I speak about this, and it causes a lot of discussion and questions. So I hope your listeners will tap into it.
What do you think? You thought I dwelled too much? I knew that you wanted to maybe get on to part 2 more. Or
yeah, but you know what you want to do. I trust you. You're a pro. I'm not gonna. You know what I mean?
Right. This rabbi thing, Rabbi Lezevnik. I'm Presidential Estates in Lakewood here. It is. Every time I call him, he's accessible. The main thing I forgot to say is it makes me feel like I have a place. The rabbis inquire. He inquires about my whereabouts. So even all my friends are in basements and they're davening at a shtibel. So they have a davening, they have a minyan. They don't have a makam kavua. They don't have someone who asks about, like, I was going to go to Miami.
Maybe start, if you introduce the podcast, start with that. That's such a hush of thing that you just said. And this is a big, big problem in Lakewood. I know it firsthand that there's a lack of rabbinic leadership and people are lost. So I don't know if you do a outtake, an intake, whatever you call it. That might be a great way to start, because it's missing today.
I know that you're a big believer in this idea. One of the best Makomos I found on this is it was the Aguda convention at the beginning, like when Reb Shner Cutler, I think Reb Aaron's father, when he was in charge, he made a psak. Back when they were saying don't open restaurants, what's the one thing that Lakewood needs? He said that no shul should open in Lakewood without a rav. Otherwise, it'll take us down.
I think Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky famously said a shul without a rav is a bor b'rshos harabim.
So we got to find a way to. I'm still recording, so I got to find a way to put that in.
Yeah, that's you could start with that. But these are all critical things. These are all big things, and I think the communities are beginning to realize that more and more, the importance of having a Rav. So I hope this will help in small parts in getting us all there.
This is good. I went to another community, and it was just a disaster what was going on, but there was no rabbi. Nobody.
That's why.
The loudest balabas wins.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I'm happy you're realizing that. I'm happy you're saying that, and you should make that clear. Very, very critical.
Okay, this is going to have to be the trailer or the outtake, but now my hands are up.
Yeah. I think so. Yeah. Maybe, I would start there for sure.
Okay.
It's the way to
Rabbi.
go. If you're interested, I have a podcast called Shiloh the Week podcast. If you want to link
promote it, send everything.
So what that will do is it shows people how you get from A to B very much.
Send over the links to the podcast. Send over all the information, and I'm gonna link everything and make a trailer for it and put it in the bottom. And
Shkoyach.
Thank you, Rabbi.